Welcome to How to Yugioh.
Let's explain toxic board. Alrighty then, so in this video, I'm going to explain about a toxic board, where I feel in Yu-Gi-Oh's history it came up, and how it has affected Yu-Gi-Oh in the long term. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video. Look in front of you and you can see the infamous 5 monsters. These 5 monsters have shaped the toxic board since their inception and since they were put together. But how did these cards come to be? Well, on the second year of, the Pendulum era, these cards were put together. Now, I'll go to the next slide to showcase how these cards were put together, and since they could be all special summoned at the same time, but let's look at the effects individually and see what they do. So Mist Valley Apex Avian, its effect is once per chain. When a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can target one Mist Valley card you control, return it to the hand, and if you do, negate the activation, and if you do that, destroy it. So as we can see there, it's an Omni Negate. We have Mist Valley Thunderbird, that's the card that you're going to rebounce back. With the Avian, you have Great Shogun Xian. Its effect stating that you can only activate, your opponent can only activate one spell or trap at a time. You have Magispector Unicorn Kirin, meaning that we have a disruption. You can target a Magispector monster, including itself, and bounce a card on the opponent's side of the field. And then you have Odax Vortex Dragon, which is another Omni Negate. Obviously, as you can see right there, with its effect of shuffling another Pendulum Monster in your extra deck to facilitate that negate. So, let's go to the next slide and see how all this pans out. And as you can see here, you can see all these 5 monsters. Let's go over piece by piece and how on this toxic board is created and how it is there, and you will understand how the toxic board has come to be and why I feel every single board in combo deck board in Yu-Gi-Oh follows this philosophy, as you can see here. So it starts first with an Omni Negate. As you can see there, Oda's Vortex Dragon is the Omni Negate. This was the start of our first step in creating the toxic board. So you first have an Omni Negate. And then you can see Valley Apex Avian with another Omni Negate. You have the Magispector Unicorn Kirin, that's the disruption. You have the Great Shogun Xian as your floodgate. And you have the Mist Valley Thunderbird as your loop Omni Negate. Okay? With these 5 cards, all these things come into being. So, with all the things I've said, why, you may ask, does this facilitate the toxic board? Well, first of all, Pendulum's introduced this. When you try to negate, they'll obviously negate with the Vortex Dragon, and then they'll negate again when you activate another effect with the Apex Avian, bouncing back Mist Valley Thunderbird. Thunderbird's effect will activate, if we can go there, seeing to that slide, which will return it back, meaning that Avian is live, because it loops the Omni Negate, meaning that you have, in technical terms, or in theory, infinite Omni Negates. And then you have the disruption, which is Magispector Unicorn Kirin. Also, it can't be targeted or destroyed, and it can target itself and bounce a card on your opponent's side of the field. And finally, you have Great Shogun Xian, which is your floodgate, meaning your opponent can only activate one spell or trap. So, and that's it. Looking at that board, it is absolutely disgusting, right? You essentially, during the time this board was released, no deck in Yu-Gi-Oh could beat this board. I'm sure we got to remember at this point in time, Kaijus were just released. Outside of Kaijus, you were shit out of luck. You really didn't have any ways of breaking this sort of board. There was no Dark Ruler no more at this time. There wasn't anything at this time. And when we look at this board, we can begin to understand, right, where the toxic board in Yugioh comes from. Because every single board now in Yugioh follows this philosophy. When you study toxic boards today, although this board I believe came out, I can say around 2018, around there, second year of the Pendulum era. So all toxic boards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, especially combo decks, follow this philosophy of one, they will have an Omni Negate, they will have two Omni Negates, they will have some form of disruption there, and then they will have a floodgate, and then they will have a way to loop one of those Omni Negates in some way, either in an infinite fashion, in infinity as we can see here, or in some sort of way. They will have a way to loop those Omni Negates. And that's how it works. But I want to go to the next slide to facilitate how this year things have gone out of control and this toxic board has become even worse. And why we've had sort of a hard reset in the TCG with our ban lists and with the cards that have been released. So let's move on. And as you can see with these three cards, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Has progressed, the toxic board has also progressed as well, as now we have cards such as Dark Ruler No More and board breakers, so that we can break those boards, meaning that a monster-centric toxic board doesn't work anymore. But no matter, during 2024, our toxic board has evolved. As you can see here, you can see these three cards in front of you: 9 Pillars of the Yang Zing, Zephyr Divine Strike, and Zephyr Nui, Secret of the Yang Zing. When we look at the modern board now, it looks much more dangerous, and this is the sort of board that we see in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. We see it especially in form of this year. We still have the 5 major monsters there with their respective effects. You'll have the Ordai's Vortex Dragon there being the Omni Negate. You will have the Mist Valley Apex Avian, or a monster similar to that, being another Omni Negate. You will have a form of disruption there with Kirin, similar sort of stuff. You will have a floodgate there of some kind in that toxic board. There's going to be some floodgate somewhere. It's either, whether it's not in the side or in the main, there's always a way to put a floodgate there. And then you'll have the Mist Valley Thunderbird so that you can loop that Omni Negate. And finally, what you're going to have as well, usually most of the time, is you'll have something like a 9 Pillars of the Yang Zing, which will be an Omni Negate that's a counter trap, meaning you're going to be able to stop your opponent breaking this board with a board breaker or something like a Dark Ruler No More. And finally, to just sweeten the deal, you will have hand traps on top of that. So when you look at this board and when you look at this toxic board philosophy and look at where it has ended up right now, it's completely out of control. This is part of the reason why in 2024, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has become especially bad in terms of just the toxicity and just the scoop phase. Now, in the Pendulum era, it wasn't this bad. Did we have hand traps? Yes. But the thing is that we hand traps were not a part of the game as much because you couldn't put in so many hand traps as they weren't one-card combos. Part of the issue why hand traps have now entered into the toxic board equation is because one-card combos have become a thing which have been introduced solely this year, I would say. And this has basically sped up the toxicity of boards in Yu-Gi-Oh! To a whole new level. And if we can see our secondary board, it has the same sort of philosophy here. This is the sort of boards we are making now. And this is part of the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh! Needed a hard reset with the ban list that we've had, with the card pool that we have. And this essentially is what I will say is the toxic boards of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. They always follow this philosophy of having 2 Omni Negates, 1 Disruption, 1 Floodgate, and 1 other card that loops the Omni Negate. You will have a counter spell or a counter trap that is a negation for a board breaker to break your board. And that's essentially it. And you will also have hand traps on top of that. That's how Yu-Gi-Oh has been now for quite a long time. It's sped up to this point, and this is the overall conclusion of how every single combo deck operates in Yu-Gi-Oh right now. When you look at this board here that I showcased to you, this entire board is what every single combo board makes in Yu-Gi-Oh in 2024. For the longest time, every single board in Yu-Gi-Oh, study them and look it up, they will always follow this philosophy. There will always be 2 Omni Negates, one form of disruption, one floodgate, and a way to loop the floodgate, and a counter trap to negate the board breaker. So let's go to the overall conclusion. What can I say about this? As you can see in this video, I've explained to you where toxic boards have come from. I've explained to you as well the philosophy and the incidents of these toxic boards, and understanding how their backbone always have the same strategy. They always do the same thing. The board is always the same. The cards may be different. The way that they manifest the board may be different, but the overall philosophy is the same. While in the past, they had 2 Omni Negates. In the Pendulum era, you'd usually place on the board 2 Omni Negates, 1 disruption, and 1 way to loop the Omni Negate and a floodgate. Essentially 5 pieces of interaction that would just completely stop your opponent. Now, there's even that toxic board has been increased over time. And now, not only do you have 2 Omni Negates, a disruption, a way to loop the Omni Negate, and a floodgate, you also add hand traps on top of that you'll have in your hand, and as well as a counter trap, which will be an Omni Negate specifically designed to negate the opponent's card that's attempting to break your board. So essentially, we've gone to a stage now where the toxic board is so toxic that you essentially can't break the board at all. That's where Yu-Gi-Oh has come at the moment, and that's where I think I've liked what Konami has done this year in TCG, and has just seen that the toxicity of Yu-Gi-Oh has gone to such a point where it's completely out of control, and it needed to be just curb stomped, and we needed a fresh slate. When we look at the ban list and the targeted hits that we've had in the TCG, it's been absolutely fantastic. We started the year by getting rid of the generic negates. We also, to break that toxic board philosophy, we've also limited a lot of the major floodgates in the game, again, limiting the toxic board philosophy. Another thing we've done as well is we have introduced new hand traps that also limit the hand trap makeup of Yu-Gi-Oh. As we can see with the meta scene now, it is much healthier because people are playing Dominus Impulse and Dominus Purge, meaning you can't just slap in a lot of hand traps in your deck. So we can see that the toxic board philosophy has been broken this year, and Yu-Gi-Oh is looking much, much healthier and much better for the foreseeable future. Are there things we still need to tackle in Yu-Gi-Oh? Absolutely. But I would say one of the biggest issues we've had in Yu-Gi-Oh is the toxic board, how it came about in the Pendulum era, and how we need to get rid of the toxic board philosophy in Yu-Gi-Oh for the future to come. Well, that's all I've got to say in this video. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh master. My fate, right, is in your hands.